Alrighty, so we will begin. Marvelous. Okay, thanks so much everybody for joining us. Now, my name's Lupek, and today I'm going to talk to you about journal marketing, and we're going to be covering the basics. Now, what are we going to be looking at? Well, we're going to talk about housekeeping items. So basically, because this is a webinar, everybody is on mute. If you have any questions or queries, please do put them into the questions box, and then I'll answer these at the end of the session. Now, if there is anything that I'm unable to answer, then I'm actually going to, I'll come back to you directly afterwards, because we're able to tell who's actually putting questions in. So any questions at all, please do let us know, and we'll happily help and address these at the end. Don't wait till the end, just pop them in the box as the session goes along. So I'm also going to cover who I am, and then we'll talk about journal strategy, and we'll talk about marketing planning, hints and tips, and next steps. Now, this webinar, this masterclass that we're doing is really essential for those who have just started out in the academic publishing field. Especially those in marketing. It's great for interns as well, but also for those outside of marketing, say an editorial, for example, that really want to understand a bit more about what it is that their colleagues are doing in marketing around their journals, and also explore opportunities that maybe could help those marketers. So we'll also cover the hints and tips, and then finally we'll cover next steps. And then we'll have the Q&A. And if we don't have any questions, then you will get to leave early, which is great. Okay, so who am I? My name, as I mentioned before, is Lupek. I'm the Managing Director of the International Bunch. I've been in this community now in academic publishing, scholarly communications area for around about 19, 20 years. Presently, this year, I have had the absolute delight of co-hosting Peer Review Week with Phil Hurst and the Royal Society. And also, I'm Vice Chair of CILIP Cymru Wales, which is the Welsh chapter of a CILIP committee. And also, I'm Vice Chair of the Membership and Marketing Committee for ALPS. And both of those are going to be turning into chair positions for 2021. I'm also a Business Wales mentor, so I give back locally, and I help to advise people through voluntary work with their marketing. So the International Bunch is a consultancy I set up last year after 3 successful years as a consultant, and we created the business because ultimately we had to grow due to demand, but we primarily focus on 3 core areas, which is advisory, marketing, and progressive thinking as well. So do check out our website, www.internationalbunch.com, and just get in touch if you've got any queries or if you're looking for support. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is journal strategy. Now, this is really vital to be thinking about right from the outset. And when we talk about journal strategy here, we're talking about the reach, the impact, the discoverability, the quality, and the accessibility. Now, these are the 5 key areas that I have identified here. Now, as I go through these, you'll probably see, well, do you know what? There are loads of these that I would want to be focusing on for this year in terms of what I deem to be the strategic priorities for this journal. Well, you know, there's only 24 hours in a day and we can't do everything. So it's about what is the most important, what are you prioritizing, and what is aligned to the vision or your organization's main objectives. So when we look at reach, that's around looking at awareness, raising awareness. Maybe you have a specific regional target that you're looking at. It could be around increasing your global visibility. It could be around increasing readership, so downloads as well. It could be around submissions. And it could be around stakeholder engagement because, say, for example, funders are taking a much more active role in the academic publishing process now. Maybe it's impact. Maybe it's looking at return on investment, so citations as well, or alt metrics, usage, downloads, internal data, lots of that great data that you have internally, hidden away in systems sometimes, and also engagement. And what about discoverability? So which directories is your journal in? Are you aggregating your journal, which is actually could be an additional source of revenue? Are you indexing the content? Where are you indexing it? Do you have the appropriate abstract and index information? Are you indexed in abstract and index databases? What library systems are you part of? And how easily is your content discoverable there? Also thinking about the SEO side, the search engine optimization. What are the keywords that you're using for your journal homepages? What type of text are you using? Have you looked into improving your search engine optimization? What about interoperability? What partnerships do you have? Who are you working with? And how easily can the data of your journals be used in other systems? So what formats is your output, for example? In terms of quality, we have what are your editorial procedures like in terms of quality or submissions? Are they really quality submissions that you're getting from different regions, or do you want to make sure that you're increasing or improving the quality, and how do you do that? And then content as well, and peer reviewers, editorial board members and staff. Now, you'll notice here that we've got some specific symbols, and from years ago when I worked for a service provider, it was content is king, but discoverability is queen. Hence why you'll see that discoverability has the queen chess piece, and quality, because content's in there, has the king chess piece. And then finally, maybe it's about accessibility, so compliance, ethics and inclusivity. Maybe it's about open research, or it's about the sales models. And so how accessible is your content to a librarian, for example, for them to have it as part of their budget? So I've kind of cut things down into these 5 different areas. Now you may take bits out of each of these areas, and editorial colleagues will say to me, I want all of those. Well, as I mentioned before, it's not always all possible. So we're looking at what actually can you achieve as a priority that's the most important for you to achieve for the coming year. So what do you need to do? You need to make your brand relatable. You need to tell the journal story. Now, I see this across the board, and we're helping a number of publishers now to amend their tone of voice, to change the journal homepage text, because sometimes it can be so factual and so boring. Now, these are people that you want to resonate with. So look to change your journal story. Engage, inspire, resonate, and motivate them to do what it is that you want them to do. If it's researchers and you want them to go and read the papers from the journal, if it's authors and you want them to submit excellent quality publications, whatever it may be, these are people at the end of the day, and you need to talk to them like people. And so you want them to really feel that they're involved and they're part of a special community. So create that community, connect with the people, and communicate to a global audience. So this is about, don't just think about talking about specific regions or talking to a specific region, but make sure that you resonate across the board. And actually, we covered this recently in the inclusivity webinar that we just did, which you can find on our YouTube channel. You want to help your journal to stand out from the crowd. And you want to be unforgettable. Could have a little Nat King Cole song coming on here. Not forgettable. Okay. So we're looking at who are your stakeholders. Now, often when I speak to marketeers and I'll speak to editorial teams about this, people will be thinking of the primary stakeholders. So be thinking about the corresponding and the co-authors, the researchers, the editorial board members as well. But that's not just the community. Of course, you have the peer reviewers as well involved in the process. You have the readers, so those that are reading it. But then you have the librarians and the information professionals. And the reason I say information professionals in addition to librarians is because those that work in a more corporate environment may have different roles and responsibilities and actually don't refer to themselves as librarians. So it's important to think about all these different stakeholders that you might have. And if you have a journal homepage, don't let that journal homepage just talk to one of these audiences. It needs to resonate with multiple audiences. Funders, I mentioned at the beginning, funders are really stepping into the conversation now for academic publishing. So they are also going to be paying more attention and going to these pages and seeing the communications that are being done. So you really need to be thinking about all these different multiple stakeholders. And finally, public. We need to be thinking about the public accessibility in terms of their access to this content, which is so far greater than it used to be, especially when you're in a situation like the pandemic and a lot of content becomes more openly available as a scheme that a lot of publishers have done, which is actually content that may have been paywalled before. And of course, with the rapid development and movement of open research. And then finally, we want to look at the internal customers. Don't forget about your colleagues, your direct colleagues in your team, editorial or marketing or sales or external service providers. Those are your internal customers, and you need to be thinking about how also you're working with them. And service providers is in there because if you have a strategy that is about interoperability, maybe, for example, it's about the format of the output of your articles, and when you're sending that out to various repositories or when you're sending that out to Crossref or wherever you're sending that, it's the format of how you're sending it. So for example, an aggregator can pick it up and you can send it to their system so that they can aggregate the content that you have and improve your discoverability. Okay, so marketing planning is the next bit that we're going on to, which ties very much into the journal strategy. Now, what I want to talk to you about here is the journal life cycle. And I've got a great image that was taken here from the street where we've overlaid some additional information. So when you're thinking about where exactly is the journal in the life cycle, so if it's in the introduction phase, let's say that's a journal launch phase. Is it in the growth phase or where you're going to be increasing various different components? Or is it in the established phase where it's been around for some time, so it's at maturity level? And then you've got decline. So what do you then move it back into to make sure that it gets the appropriate level of marketing activities to be able to accommodate where exactly you want to ultimately it to be? And actually by prioritizing those marketing activities, by using the life cycle, so the decline would be at risk, for example, you're dedicating specific activities to help that journal get to ultimately where you want it to be, which is probably in like the growth or the maturity area. So what stage is your journal at? Have a think about that. We talked about journal strategy, so you need to define what is your priority focus. Think about your SMART journal objectives. Now, I could ask an editorial colleague and say, what are the journal objectives for this journal? And they'll say to me, we want to increase submissions and reach. For me, that doesn't mean anything. I want to know, what are the SMART journal objectives? What are the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely objectives? So to put it into context, aligned to an organization's vision, objectives, whether it's annual or long term, it would be something like the examples that I've given here. So increase the emissions from the US by 10%. It's measurable because I've said by 10%, so I can measure that. And also it says from the US, so I can specifically segment data to have a look to see from the US, how have we increased the submissions? But maybe it's not about submissions. Maybe it's about quality. So actually, I want to look at how many actually got through the editorial process is that we have and were published. So published 20% more articles than in 2020, for example. So that could be my 2021 objective. Or, that really gives you an idea of just being a bit more specific. How can we measure that? And also, is it realistic? Don't just put some massive number in and actually it's not achievable, because that leaves everyone feeling demotivated. So go for something that you feel is realistic and achievable. But, you really need to be considering your niche, who it is that you are targeting. Is it a specific region? Is it a specific stakeholder group? Use KPIs. KPIs means key performance indicators. So this is where you set specific benchmarks, and then you can see whether or not you achieve those benchmarks or go over those benchmarks. Ultimately, you're going to want to either hit the benchmarks or go over them, because when you go over them, you know that you're exceeding what you expected them to do. They may be industry benchmarks, maybe they're to do with how many published articles there were in a specific subject area. Maybe you're using specific measurements like impact factor or eigenfactor or site score. So there's lots of different ways that you can set your benchmarks, your key performance indicators, so that you know that the journal is performing how you expect it to. And I mentioned this when we talked about consider your niche, and this is about understanding your audience. So this is thinking about the personas, the pain points, the needs and the wants of who your audience is. If you haven't set up personas yet, that's a really useful tool to do it, because it helps you to focus and think about who exactly it is that we want to target. Communication, that can be like an elevator pitch, so tone of voice as well, consistent and clear messaging. Now, if I say to you, do you know what I mean by elevator pitch? Some of you will say yes, some of you will say yes, but I don't know what it means, and then others will say no. So imagine you're going into an elevator. Let's say if you're a marketing colleague and an editorial colleague, you're in the elevator or the lift together, and you would like to, and you have a potential editor-in-chief in there. And so from an editorial perspective, you'd be thinking, great, I really want to inspire and motivate this editor-in-chief to come and join our publication, to be the editor-in-chief of our publication, because it would be amazing. And you literally have 30 seconds as an editorial team member to tell that editor or that potential editor-in-chief why that journal is so amazing and why they should join. So what you'll need to do is sit down and write down say like a paragraph, a really powerful paragraph about that journal. That is your elevator pitch to a potential editor-in-chief. And then you communicate that message also to your colleagues, marketing, sales, whoever it may be, so that you have a consistent and clear message about that journal, and you're really telling the story of that journal. And now I gave that as an example from an editorial perspective. So to talk further about marketing planning, as well as having smart objectives, you need to have smart activities. And this is also about being smart in terms about being clever and efficient and effective. So ensure that your activities are cost effective. Refine your processes as much as you can. And if you can automate where possible, because this means that there's lower maintenance, it's more cost effective, and it means that you have more time to do other things. Also think about cross-promotion activities. So are there contra deals that you can do? Are there partnerships? Maybe your editorial board, you know, they can also be a wonderful tool. Maybe there's other things that you can be thinking about in terms of other journals that you can be collaborating with. So when you're thinking about that, there's also could be cross-selling. So think about bundles that your journal can be a part of, collections that they can be a part of. And think about your budget. Now, over the past few years, we've seen a huge shift with print in terms of the demand of print resources has dramatically increased. A number of publishers are no longer printing a number of marketing collateral, because a lot of the time, especially when it comes to the end of a conference, they just go in the bin, because it's cheaper to bin them or to put them in a recycling bin or a normal bin than it is to ship them back to the office. So that's an absolute waste of money. And when you look at the return on investment, you can see what are you actually just sticking in the bin and not shipping back. But also think about the online activities. Not everything online is free. In terms of design has a cost to it, production has a cost to it. These are marketing costs, producing things from a marketing perspective, and then any stationery as well. So if that's you wanted to have pens. Always, always, always measure your output and be agile and adapt to the landscape that it is right now, which I'll explain in just a moment. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but we do a masterclass around agile marketing. So I do recommend going to have a look at that. And then also, you know, I'm going to keep mentioning this because it's really important, but you need to decide how you will tell the journal story. So there's a really great model out there called the Golden Circle. And this is where, when you're thinking about writing copy, normally and traditionally, it's been about, right, what are you looking to sell? And then how is it important and why is it important? Well, this is actually turning this around and thinking in a different way. This is very much how organizations like Apple and Google think. So it's like, why is it important and how is it going to help them? And then what is it? End with the what. Start with the why, resonate with people. And then we have elevator pitch there, which we've already talked about. Now, there are numerous different activities that you can do when marketing a journal, but you need to find the right ones that are going to work in the subject niche that you're in and with the resources that you have available. So discoverability, of course, is key because your content really must be discoverable. What collateral are you going to be producing? So are you going to be producing any printed collateral? If you're going to be looking at, for example, flyers or postcards, anything like that. What online collateral are you going to have? Online content, what's going to be downloadable, what's just going to be a web page, etc. What promotional items you're going to have. Are you going to do any competitions? Are you going to do any giveaways? I mean, these different elements that we're going to be talking about, these activities, they're all very much aligned to what is ultimately your priority focus for this year or for the next few years. And those activities should be aligned to that. So you won't have to do all of these, but this just gives you an idea of some of the things. And then events, what events are you going to be attending? What online networks are you part of? So if you think of like social networks like Facebook and Twitter, or are you part of Reddit or LinkedIn, those kind of online networks. And then surveys as well. How are you going to be gathering the feedback and testing the market and finding out what's important, what your target audience really want, what your stakeholders need? Are you going to be doing any funding or any grants as well? So for example, you're going to be doing grants for conferences, for researchers to be able to attend specific conferences. Thinking always about legislation. How compliant are you in terms of what's being done? And then you really need to ensure that you're actually continuing to do not just your external communication, so how you're communicating with your target audience, but your internal communications. How are you feeding this information back to your internal teams? And that is often very much forgotten about. Is there any article and author promotion and support that you can do? And then, are there any single touch or multi-stakeholder email campaigns? So, you know, single and multi-touch campaigns are basically, are you sending a single email out about something, or are you sending a series of emails about something? So for example, if you want to promote a webinar and you have a list, maybe you send them 3 emails. The first email invites them to register. The second email reminds them to register. And the third email will be sent after the webinar. So that's a multi-touch email because there's you're going to touch them at 3 different points, at 3 different stages. So you need to be thinking about what sort of email campaigns that you're doing. And also in terms of mentoring about collateral, and I am going to talk about some things in the hints and tips section too. But when you're thinking about collateral, you need to be also making use of the space that you have behind your collateral. So what do I mean when I say that? I mean that if you have a piece of collateral and you've just printed it on one side, you're losing an opportunity on the other side. So why not do some cross-selling on the reverse, for example? So you have your journal on one side, and then on the back you have maybe the collections or any specific subject areas that it's in, or other journals within that family that may be relevant to that target audience. And finally, we have stakeholder engagement. So how you're engaging and working with your stakeholders. So the hints and tips: be agile. adapt, change with the landscape and your objectives. Now, this image that I've got here comes from our Agile Marketing Masterclass. And this is about normally and traditionally in marketing, when you do your planning and you're doing it a year in advance, you're basically saying, in a year, I project and I predict that we are going to be here. This is my vision. But actually, as the year goes on and things happen and a pandemic comes along and everything changes, actually, where I thought I was going to end up with my vision is not the actual landscape I end up in. And that's really important to be thinking about. So how can you be checking in and ensuring that you are adapting with the landscape that you are now, and how can you be agile? Think about your niche and who are your influencers, your multiple stakeholders, for example. That's really important. Certainly in marketing, it's much easier to do marketing that's very targeted. It's been very much the case in the past, years ago, that you would send out an email campaign to as many people as you possibly could. Of course, you know, a lot of contact details got mistreated. And then we had legislation like we do nowadays, like GDPR and the EU legislation. So what we need to be thinking about now is, rather than just mass mailing everybody, how can we be more effective and efficient with those contacts that we're contacting? How can we contact them? And also with what means? So we don't want to keep bombarding people with emails. So how are we being effective and efficient in terms of how we're connecting with our niche target audience? If you have researchers, if you just send a mass email out to all of the researchers that you have in your organization for a very subject specific webinar on, I don't know, let's say on the components of structure of the stone from Stonehenge, then not everybody is going to be interested in that, because that doesn't sit within their remit. So then you're going to find that your engagement level, if you send out emails, for example, your open stats, your click-throughs, they're not really going to be very good. What you want to do is only be targeting those people who actually want to receive information about that. So then you would find those specific individuals that topic would be of interest to. And then you'll have much better open rates, much better click-through rates, and you know that you're doing much better effective marketing. It's far too easy just to include a massive list and then just irritate people, and then they'll unsubscribe. And if you have one big old unsubscribe list and people can't choose what they receive from you, then someone will just send out an email campaign and then others will subscribe, and then you'll never be able to send them out the stuff that really is of interest to them. When thinking about online promotions, absolutely be consistent. So this is about using online platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it is that you use. It's about ensuring that you are consistently posting content, say at a certain time that's the most effective and efficient for the time zone that you're looking to target. It varies across the different social platforms. For example, you need to also, in terms of be consistent with your language, when you send out consistent messaging, you're really strengthening your messaging, and people keep hearing the same message over and over again, which means that they'll take it in more and they'll begin to remember it more. A lot of these online systems, in fact, they all do have algorithms, which means that your content will be displayed in certain ways to different people in their feeds. So actually, when you're more consistent, so for example, if you load into YouTube and you load videos regularly into YouTube and you're consistently loading them, then the algorithm will pick that up and it'll see you quite favorably. And also in YouTube, for example, you don't need to have a huge following on there. You just need to have a engaged following on there. And that really helps you in terms of the algorithm and what YouTube will do for you. But also join networks for authentic discussion. I mean, I absolutely love Reddit. I find it fascinating what you can read in there. And we've done a couple of AMAs this year in Reddit, one for peer review week, for peer review week. And also we did another one recently from the Silip Cymru Wales in the Welsh Reddit group, or subreddit as they're called, the groups on Reddit. With your language, be clear, keep it simple, keep it consistent. Because you're talking to a global audience, don't use really complicated big words. If you're also targeting or looking to connect with early career researchers, you know, if you're adding in specific complex words or very industry specific words that maybe a later career researcher may know, then that won't resonate with an early career researcher. If you can, template your approach to things, so have a nice clean template for email campaigns, for your social media images, in terms of for your social text, any of this activities that you're doing, the more templated you can do, you're enabling different people to be able to use those templates to follow the standard form that's expected. So you have a much clearer, stronger message. And you're managing expectations also internally about what to be produced. Your brand is much stronger, and also it saves you time and money. Larger campaigns are really interesting because you can have subject or objective driven campaigns. That would be, for example, if you had like a really big campaign that went across all of the portfolio of journals and your journal was part of it, and all you had to do was just provide some specific text that gets slotted into a certain part of an email template. That means it's much more automated and you know you're part of that process. Now, there are lots of different examples out there of what publishers, service providers and societies are doing in terms of these larger campaigns. And they're really fascinating. And that's definitely something that you should be thinking about, is how can you collaborate together with the whole portfolio so that each individual journal can take advantage of that. Categorize your journal. So this is about managing expectations and also aligning to the resources that you have. So maybe your journal has a scorecard, maybe you rank journals or group them specifically. So when you look back and think about the journal life cycle, we're thinking about, well, if it's an at-risk journal, this happens. If it's a growth journal, this happens. If it's an established journal, this happens. If it's a launch journal, this happens. And so everyone knows there's a specific checklist of activities that they know is going to happen to that journal. And you will be need to measuring those journals to ensure that if they move into another criteria or category, it will change in terms of the activities and the resource around it. So remarketing content, I bet you've got lots of really fantastic content like videos or webinars that you can just cut up into bite-sized pieces and then create like mini series, or cut webinar content from a few webinars and then stitch them together to create a completely different new webinar. Something to mention here, just a bit of a tip, is that 80% of social videos are watched without sound. So when you do create a social video, just make sure that you have some subtitles that appear underneath. Be smart with social. Only have what you can commit to. And so don't just go out there and get social media for all of your, across all of the platforms for your journal if you're not going to be able to commit to sending out frequent posts across those different channels. Just then go for one and trial that out and build your community and connect with your community and engage. And don't just post, engage with them as well. That's really important. Use Twitter to count as the basis for all your social, in the respect that it's very restrictive on the number of characters that you can use. So if you know that if you create all your posts to the Twitter character count, then you can just use those across the other services as well. And add images. You know, social images are great, GIFs are great, but videos are better. Now, tweets with video are retweeted 6 times more than images and 3 times more than GIFs. So it just shows the power of videos, just because there's motion happening in the news feeds. Stop doing what's not working. It's just too easy for people to keep doing the same old activities the same old marketing that they've always done because someone thinks that's what they should be doing, but they're not measuring it. Or actually, they're too afraid to stop doing it because in marketing, maybe their editorial colleague doesn't want them to because they feel that actually that's much more effective way of doing it. But, you know, when you're in marketing, you're there to do your job and you're there to be able to provide the evidence to your editorial colleague to say, actually, this isn't working. Let's try this. So, you know, people only have the opinions with the information that they have. So stop doing what's not working. And you know what? If you try something else and that doesn't work or it's worse, then go back to where you were before. Be agile, adapt. Third-party dashboards as well can help you identify specific data trends aligned to your strategies. So, you know, for example, that could be like Kudos or Publons or Altmetric. Any of those are Plum Analytics. I mean, there are lots of them. Many of those service providers, they will have dashboards where you can manipulate or you can view the data and you can really see what your community or your target audience is doing. So what are the next steps? Okay, so define your strategy and objectives, create a story and a message, be consistent, truthful and authentic, absolutely imperative, always be transparent, communicate internally and externally, celebrate your achievements. Do you know how many people I speak to practically on a day-to-day level who do not celebrate their achievements and are doing some pretty much incredible things? And I don't mean that they're going to go on LinkedIn and they're going to say, wow, this is what I did today. Isn't that actually going to go on their own internal service like Yammer and say, wow, I've just done this and look at the results that I've did, because other people will see those achievements and you'll inspire them because they'll be thinking, oh, maybe I should try that for my journal. So ensure that you celebrate your achievements because you're passing on what's worked great. And also, if something hasn't worked great, pass that on as well because it's lessons learned. And that's so important. Stop letting people make the same mistakes that you've already made. It's a bit like in the research community, an institution not wanting their researchers to publish negative results because they only want them to publish positive results, which means how does science, for example, move forward if we keep publishing only the positive results and people keep making the same mistakes with the negative results? Decide what is achievable, be realistic about what you're doing, look at your internal infrastructure and how can we actually manage this? How can we do this? Measure your output and adjust. I think that is probably one of the biggest take homes that I can say today is ensure that whatever you're doing, you're measuring it. Be it that you're looking at the specific statistics, emails, open rates, click-through rates, rather than just open rates, look at of those that opened, who then went on to click, because those are the people that are engaged with your content. Those are the people that are of interest. And if people stop engaging with your content, then maybe you need to do a campaign after a certain amount of time, 6 months, a year. If they haven't opened your newsletter in that time, why are you even sending them the newsletter? So why not just email them, do a campaign every 6 to 12 months and say, we haven't heard from you. Maybe this email is not of interest for you. Would you like to unsubscribe? Or maybe tell us if there's information that we should be supplying you, or maybe you want to opt into something else. You know, you're not hitting the mark with them. And so you need to understand why, or maybe they're not the right target audience. It's a bit like what I talked about earlier about mass communications. But also, you know, there's lots of great tools out there when it comes to social media. We were using Buffer, we're now using Hootsuite because that better matches what we want to do. And, you know, we're measuring in terms of our own social activities and our clients' social activities on what posts are doing, how they're performing, how can we adjust them, what can we change, how does that target audience react more with this type of post or that type of post, trialing lots of different things and seeing what works. And of course, you know, trends and people's likes and dislikes change over time. Connect with your community. It's hugely, hugely important that you ensure that your community has a way of speaking to you and connecting with you, whether that's through surveys, whether that's through social and they're tagging you in things, or they're direct messaging. How are you responding? Looking to see how they can actually talk to you, and then how are you talking back to them? Be smart. So this is smart in your objectives, smart in your activities, and then smart in everything that you do. Okay, so finally, in this area here, I just want to cover the International Bunch resources section. Now, we have lots of great resources and it's continually building. Excuse me, I'm just going to cough a moment. I think it's continually talking for about 40 minutes when I'm so used to just sitting and listening or talking with someone, but not continually talking like this. Okay, so we've got all these really great resources that we're expanding and we're always building. If there's stuff that you want us to be covering in these, let us know. Just send an email to team@internationalbunch.com and we would love to find out from you. Also, this is just an image of our YouTube channel. You can see here that we have lots of great hints and tips. There's lots of my face on here. Excuse me, because we're actually because it's me that's doing these filming. Some of my other team don't actually want to get onto video, so I don't mind hearing myself and watching myself. But also we have all of the live webinars that we've done as well, so do take a look. We've got lots of really great ones in terms of looking at storytelling. Also, if you want to discover more about the article workflow and what an author does in terms of their workflow and what happens with the article. And then we recently did one about incorporating inclusion into your communication strategy, which was a fascinating one that we did. So go over to this channel. If you are in a country that you cannot access YouTube, we are like China, for example, we're actually going to be creating a channel in a China-friendly video platform very soon. So this content will also be available on there. Okay, so let's see, have we had any questions? Just a couple of comments. But no questions, marvelous, right. Well, that's the end of this session. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Do let us know if you have any questions. We're here and we will happily help. Thank you so much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session. And the next webinar that we'll have is all about talking about measuring the impact of your journal. So today was about covering the basics, and the next one is going to be thinking about how you can measure the impact of your journal. Okay, so thanks very much, everyone. And